Okay, so section 2, page 8, this is where you should be right now. Page 8 or section 2 is all about the 3 different approaches to probability. So we're going to talk about what are the 3 approaches, and then we're going to look at some examples, and you're going to place them in the correct approach to probability. So, do you guys remember the 3 approaches? Because you read about them? And they're written at the top of page 8.
Classical, relative frequency, and subjective.
You guys have such good memories. Okay. Classic probability is when you assume that every outcome is equally likely. So classic probability is kind of like your pure probability. You use formulas, it's all theoretical, and you assume that every event has the same possibility. So if I just took a test and I want to know what's the probability that I got an A on it, I'm going to assume A, B, C, D, F are all equally likely. So the probability that I get an A is 1/5. 1/5, yeah. Probability we always do is a decimal. So generally you don't say 20% is the probability. The rest of the world does, but statisticians don't. So you would say the probability is 1/5 or 0.2. So that's classic probability. Relative frequency is when you can't actually calculate the probability. So it's not theoretical, you can't use a formula, so you actually carry out an experiment. So I find a coin on the ground and I want to know what's the probability of flipping a head. And I don't know, because I don't know anything about the coin, I just found it on the ground. Could be a fair coin, might not be a fair coin. So what I would do is I would take that coin and I would flip it 1,000 times. And I would look at how many heads did I get. If I get 600 heads, then I would say the probability of a head is 0.6. So relative frequency, this is the practical approach where you actually carry it out. You actually simulate an experiment. And then the last one is subjective. That's your own personal opinion. So if I ask you, what's the probability that the Cubs are going to win tonight? And you would tell me 1, because we're not doing a percent, but you would say 1, right? That's your own personal opinion. That's subjective. Subjective, you pretty much only use in like conversations with people. You don't actually publish anything using a subjective approach. Yes. Okay. Now you guys have these examples listed. I want to know what category they fall into. So if I look at the probability that a fair coin will land heads up when tossed, what is the probability that a fair coin will land heads up? 0.5, 1/2. Which approach does that fall into? Classical. Yeah. You're assuming that the heads and tails are equally likely. I think there's a 50-50 chance of rain tomorrow.
Subjective.
Subjective, your own personal opinion. The probability that an 18-year-old male driver will be at fault in an automobile accident. Relative frequency. We don't actually have a formula to calculate that. We just look at a sample of automobile accidents that involved 18-year-old, well, that involved anybody, and then see how many of them was the 18-year-old male driver at fault. Flipping a fair coin 300 times and observing the proportion of heads. Relative frequency. What's important to know with this is if you flip a fair coin 300 times, how many heads should you get? 150. Are you actually going to? Probably not. It's probably going to be close, but it's not going to be exactly 150. So let's say that we got 160 heads instead. Then we would say the probability of a head is 160 out of 300, whatever that simplifies to. So theoretically it should be 0.5, but with relative frequency you look at what actually happens. Chance of winning the Illinois lottery is approximately 1 in 10 million. Classical, right? And then there's 90% chance you will have math homework tonight.
Subjective.
Subjective. Yeah. Okay. That's not too difficult, right? That was pretty much all of section 2. There's one thing that's really important though. And this goes along with the relative frequency approach. I think you read about it. It's called the law of large numbers. So along with the relative frequency approach to probability is the law of large numbers. What the law of large numbers tells you is the larger your sample size, the closer you will be to the true probability. So if I found a coin on the ground and I wanted to know what's the probability of flipping a head, I would want to flip the coin a lot of times. I don't want to just flip it 10 times, I want to flip it 1,000 times. So the larger your sample is, the closer you're going to get to the true probability. Yeah, here's an example. This is actually a simulation from flipping a coin, and it looks at the proportion of heads or the probability of flipping a head. You're going to notice between like 0 and 25 flips, it's not really that accurate. But as soon as you have more than 50 flips, the probability of a head is 0.5. Okay, that's the 3 approaches to probability.